Welcome to AGAPE Social Justice, where we focus on love, truth, and justice. I appreciate you tuning in today, and I can't wait until you meet today's in-studio guest, none other than my state representative, Noah Arbit, who happens to also be one of my dearest friends. Noah, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm so excited, partially for selfish reasons, because I've been wanting to really connect with you and have our one-on-one time, but you have been so busy since you were elected into office. So
Crazy.
I'm really glad we have this opportunity. But why don't you introduce yourself to the listening audience, tell them who you are and how you got to the point of being state representative.
Oh, wow. What a question. Well, I was born and raised in West Bloomfield and have lived in that community my whole life. And, I never thought I was going to run for office. It was never something, I dreamed of or hankered for. But, I was very sick and tired of, our community being an afterthought in the conversations about policymaking in Lansing. Mm-hmm. And so I, before the last election, I called all the local elected officials. I said, hey, who's going to run? We need someone good to run. No one wanted to do it, so I said, okay, fine, I'll do it. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. That's the sign of a leader. Now, prior to that, you had some other leadership roles, though, that were pretty significant. So talk to us about how you formed the Jewish Caucus and some of the other roles that you had before being state rep.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I did was I started the Michigan Democratic Jewish Caucus to help engage Michigan's Jewish community in politics, to advocate, to organize collectively. We all know that, so many communities are facing, increased, hate and threats, whether it's, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, anti-Black racism. And so I really felt that it was important to have a vehicle, a forum in which the Jewish community could become politically engaged on those issues, especially, during the last administration, nationally, right. To be able to have that collective voice was really important for me. And so that was the work that I was doing. I also worked a little bit at the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office, and learning a lot about, the criminal justice system and how violence operates, and we can talk more about this, but, we feel the same way in that, I have always said I believe that, the root of all violence is alienation, and the cure to violence is connection.
Wow.
And I see it as sort of my role and my charge, and really why I felt that political office was a good avenue, for me to take, was because there's a lot of levers in those roles to be able to, steer policy in a direction, right? I think we've looked at policies that were so heavy-handed in terms of being punitive, right? And whether that's right or wrong, it's not effective.
Right.
Right. And so how do we come to a space where we are talking about prevention, intervention, right, and then rehabilitation?
Right.
And that's the work that I'm really interested in doing. I'm on the House Judiciary Committee as well as the House Criminal Justice Committee and the House. For the first time, we have a behavioral health subcommittee.
I love that.
Which is, all of that work I see as, being part and parcel of building safe and resilient communities. So.
Absolutely. So I love the fact, what's the new committee called?
The Behavioral Health Subcommittee.
Behavioral Health Subcommittee. Do you all have like a vision statement or mission statement, or is that something that you're creating together right now?
Well, we just had our meeting on Thursday, and our chair, Representative Felicia Brayback from the Ann Arbor area, she's actually a practicing psychologist. And so she comes to this work as a practitioner. I'm actually the vice chair of the committee. But and so one of the two areas that we really identified that we want to work on is access to mental health care across the state, as well as workforce. Because one of the real issues that we struggle with in the state of Michigan is recruiting and retaining professionals in the space of behavioral health, mental health, whether it's social workers, whether it's psychologists, psychiatrists. The dearth of child and adolescent psychiatrists in this state is abysmal. There's something like 2 north of Flint. 2.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's really critical that we get a handle on this, because I think it's one of the crises that spawns other crises. So.
Wow. Okay. So that statistic you just gave is staggering.
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time getting past that because part of what we do as adults is tell children, when you need help, go get help. And I think oftentimes we don't think about the fact that maybe there are communities who don't have access, and there are literally no resources available. So, gosh, that's really huge. I hope that at some point, and I'm sure it will, that conversation will trickle into the education conversation and talk about how we can build up our next generation in terms of going into those fields. Right.
Well, there's a couple of things. One, on the education piece. One is, I think it's House Bill 4081, I think, which is actually Representative Braybeck's bill, which I've co-sponsored, which is to increase the ratio of child or of school mental health professionals to or decrease that ratio, actually, to make it smaller to students, so that way we have more professionals available in school districts. So mandating that those school districts hire more people. But again, the question is, where do we get those people? And so one of the things that I talked about when I was campaigning was tuition, partial or full tuition payment programs for professionals working in those targeted fields, particularly mental health, because I think we all have an interest in if we have some of the best universities in the country and therefore in the world in Michigan, and if we have practitioners who are educated in Michigan, we want them to stay in Michigan. But I also think that, that's a Band-Aid solution, right? I think if we want professionals to come and be educated in Michigan and stay in Michigan, it also comes with how do we build thriving communities, right? And so that means investment in childcare, investments in healthcare, investments in public transit, investment in arts and cultural institutions to make sure that, we have, holistic, a holistic approach to drawing talent and resources here. I think that, that's my approach, my vision for economic development.
I'm trying to contain myself right now, but I'm getting really excited, and I'm thinking as you're talking, this is exactly why I supported you, because you are an out-of-box thinker. You think on a comprehensive level. I like the fact that you don't want to just piecemeal, and you're saying, okay, let's look at root cause and let's look at everything that we need to do, right?
I think it's time we start answering first order questions again. Asking them and answering them.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's so simple, but hasn't been happening. So, so the other thing that we talked a lot about, probably a couple of years ago now, is mental health, and really touching on it from a personal perspective. I've shared with you, I've shared with the community. My mom has bipolar, and as a young person growing up, I really didn't know what I was experiencing at the time, but I think by the time I was a teenager, my mother had kind of fully embraced it and was, getting the help that she needs. And unlike a lot of people, my mother really embraced going to see a professional and taking medication. And so, she's been at a point where she's been pretty stable for years. But there's so many things that happen along that journey that most people don't talk about. And even for my mom, in going through her struggle, she didn't really have a lot of family support. And we've talked about that a lot in terms of what young people are going through right now, as well as adults, and particularly in the school system. We have a lot of kids who are suffering. And I wanted you to take an opportunity just to tell people what you've learned, whether it's research now as a state rep or what you've experienced and seen going through our educational system and as you talk to people in the community.
Well, I think, just starting, from a personal, standpoint, I know what it's like to, feel unseen, unheard, and alone, like so many, do. But I had the resources and opportunities to ensure that my struggles weren't sentences. And that's just not the case for far too many people, across the state. And I'm not more worthy than anyone, but I'm just more lucky. And the fact that we have people, kids, seniors, everyone in between who lacks access to, mental health care, that's a policy choice that we make. And I think it's time we made a different one. And that's the work that, I'm really excited to work on in the House. But, I know that I would never be where I am if I had not had the opportunity and, frankly, the runway to be able to contend with those challenges and to sort of emerge as the person I am today, right? And we all need that runway. We all need that grace. And growing up...
Tell people what the runway looks like, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it looked like, treatment with, different psychologists and therapists throughout the years. Throughout my life, I have, I've been on different, medications. And, I think, and normalizing that, I think, is really important because this is not like some rare cancer that,
Right.
1 in 3 million people get.
Right.
It's very common.
It's the norm almost
right.
now.
It's the norm. And especially nowadays when technology runs our life and we have social media and the pressure to conform, and especially at a young age, it's so pervasive. But I think what's really, really profound is that, when I was dealing with some of these challenges as a young person, it was all hush hush. Like you couldn't tell people that you saw a therapist, and now everyone sees a therapist,
Right.
and it's pretty open about it. And I think that is a change, a shift that is so important, and to recognize. And we had a United States Senator, Fetterman from Pennsylvania, recently check himself into Walter Reed Medical Hospital for depression, for clinical depression. And he issued a statement about that. And I wrote on Twitter that I thought that this statement was as profoundly impactful as any bill a U.S. Senator could put forward, because it marks a sea change in how we view mental health, and who is worthy of accessing those resources. And I think anyone from someone who works at a local gas station or at a grocery store to a United States Senator, everyone, no matter where you are on the spectrum, everyone should have the access and the right to access those resources.
Absolutely.
Because our mental health should be a human right, right? And so to me, that was really important. And that's why, for me, I haven't always been an elected official, only for about 8 weeks now. But, for me, while I was campaigning and now while I'm in office, to be able to, be public about the fact that, this is something that I struggle with. This is something that so many people struggle with. And that's not something to be ashamed of. It's something that I think actually makes me a better policymaker, because it's an interesting dynamic, especially on this behavioral health committee, because we have a chair who's a practitioner and then a vice chair who is someone who has seen it from the opposite dimension, as someone who's been a patient.
Right.
And I think that's really important. And I would just say that if folks have a problem with that, then they don't have to vote for me. But I think that by and large, from the community to the community's point, like I think that it's something that has been an asset. Right. And that people have recognized.
Absolutely. I was so grateful that you made that public during the campaign and made it a signature platform issue as well, because the reality is that this is something that most of us are thinking about on a daily basis. If we aren't going through it, we have children going through it, we have parents, cousins, somebody in our family, right? Someone we love is going through a mental health crisis, has maybe been diagnosed with an actual illness. And so no longer can we act like this is some sickness that we need to put in a corner and hide, right? And here's also our reality. We as adults, particularly those, I'm much older than you are, I feel like we have to bear the responsibility of apologizing to our younger generation, because it has been our mindset of covering it and hiding it. And I believe that has contributed to the number of suicides that we are experiencing today. I mean, the number of young people who first think about taking their own lives because we haven't allowed a culture to exist in our homes, in our schools, in our churches, in our communities. And I'm going to try to table that church conversation there for a moment, because that's a hot button for me, because we like to pretend that everything's okay instead of going before people and just keeping it real.
Yeah.
Right? And realizing that our keeping it real is exactly what saves lives. Right?
Yeah. Well, and I think this shift is happening and slower in other communities. it's really interesting. You know, we talk a lot about ethnic politics and ethnic communities and how do we organize those communities, right? We talked about the Black community, the Chaldean community, the Jewish community, and you know, it's been really interesting. You know, I visited the Chaldean Community Foundation over in Sterling Heights, and the work that they're doing to have, you know, penetration of mental health resources in that community is so profound, because especially first generation, second generation Americans, and even sometimes in the Black community, you know, it can be viewed, and more religious communities too, it can be viewed as sort of, you know, it's not viewed as this, in the same way that when you have a broken arm, you go to the physician, right? And I think the more that we can get those resources in and normalizing it is just so important, because and this goes, you know, for seniors too. We have a crisis of senior mental health that is so profound, and frankly the state hasn't even done the due diligence to even, you know, look into it, you know, issue a report, you know, do a study and figure out what interventions, you know, can be brought to bear to address it. And that's one of the things that I'm really interested in working on too, because, you know, we all know that when you get to a certain age, your life changes.
Right.
And, you know, you have friends that slowly, you know, are not as numerous as they once were, and that's really difficult. And you know, you just aren't, you know, you don't have the same faculties always as you once did. And contending with that, that's a life transition that needs to be approached with gentleness and with care. And having someone to help guide through that is so important. But, you know, for those generations, it's really hard. You know, I've got grandparents who are of that age, and, you know, none of them are going to, you know, go to a shrink or get on Prozac or whatever it is. And not to say that that's necessarily what's needed in those cases, but in some cases it could be, you know, a remarkable help. And then also, you know, with decreased mobility comes, you know, with, you know, being indoors more. And we know that outdoors can often be something that's really helpful for people. And, you know, that's why, you know, on my other committee, natural resources, you know, we're talking about how do we increase green spaces, particularly in urban communities. We know that that's prophylactic against crime. It is. Shocking as it is, it is. And so
and can
all of these things are related.
Put some trees back in the urban communities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That urban or that environmental setting is so important for people, and it really is. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the senior community too, because I was in a committee meeting. I can't remember which committee it was now, but we were talking about what's happening with senior citizens post-pandemic. Most of them were alone, not just because of the shutdown, but also we extended that because from our perspective, we didn't want to go around our grandparents, right, and older adults because we didn't want to make them sick when we got back out and we're doing the things. And so it extended their period of isolation. And I think we're not talking about that enough in terms of what they're enduring. And we see them as the ones who hold it down, right, in the family, in the community, and no one's really taking the time to say, wait a minute, let me turn to them and see what they need.
What do you need?
Yeah. So I'm so glad you're focusing on that too.
It really is, you know, it's interesting, and, you know, because we talk about, you know, youth mental health and talk about the rate of suicide, particularly, you know, I mean, we talk about LGBT, you know, youth, we talk about Black youth, you know, and then we talk about, you know, seniors, and then there's everyone else in between. And the problem is acute at all levels. And so when I talk about it, I say kids, seniors, and everyone in between, because it's really important to pinpoint that those two those 2 points are really weak points. But everyone is you know, needing of these resources. And I'm not saying that this is a 2-year fix, a 4-year fix. It's not even a 10-year fix. But if we're not investing in those resources, if we're not, you know, making policy, you know, with an eye towards how do we surge resources to this problem, I really do believe that it's going to have, you know, really profoundly negative, you know, impacts going forward. Because how can you participate in the economy and be, you know, a productive member of society if you are stuck? If you have this, you know, it's like walking through quicksand, truly.
Yeah. You can't. I mean, I have experienced, you know, Kimber Bishop Yankee. I actually had her on the show. We have been partnering for over a year now in trying to assist people who are houseless, right? They've lost their home for a variety of reasons. And then we've talked about how the mental health component plays a role, not because they're diagnosed all the time with an actual illness, But when you dial 211, let's just start there, and then you have a list of all of these places you have to call, and you're already overwhelmed, right? And then now you're calling places where maybe they don't call you back.
There's no way.
Maybe they're. I mean, it just keeps adding up. If you have any medical conditions and you have to see the doctor, you have transportation. It just keeps mounting, and I have no idea how we expect people, as some people would say, pull themselves up by the bootstrap.
And they ain't got no boots.
What, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And there's one hurdle after another every single day. And I think, to your point, that's why it's important that you have people who have these lived experiences, who are not only our elected officials, but who sit on the right committees,
Right.
so that we can make sure that we're having the right conversations.
Right. It's so
Because I
important.
think people talk high level all the time and not really drilling deep into what does that look like in the day in life of
Right.
one of these individuals who's actually going through it.
Right.
And can advocate for appropriations and get the money that we need.
Right.
I went to a town hall recently, I think maybe a couple months ago, and I believe the number I heard is that we need a minimum of at least like $30 million more to come into Oakland County alone for mental health resources.
Yeah.
That's staggering.
Yeah.
So I can't even imagine what that number looks like at a state level, and how you can figure out how to deliver that for us, and then make sure you deliver it for your local community, for your constituents
Right.
too.
Well, and I think the issue is that we're not even close to that right now. And the priorities really need to be assessed and reassessed. And that's why, the more people, and that's why I urge, viewers, anyone, when they're looking at their elected officials, ask them where they stand on budgetary priorities, because your budget is your values, right? Your budget and your personnel, those are your values, right? And truly, right now, and I'm hoping it'll change, but right now the proposal for mental health resources is not where it should be, is not where it needs to be, not even close. And I'm really fighting to make sure that those resources are there, but I cannot fight alone, and so we need additional backup and people who are going to talk about this. As far as I see it, we have concurrent, cascading, compounding crises. Whether it's mental health, housing, the climate, right, healthcare, childcare, right. All of these things.
Hate crimes.
Right. Violence, gun
culture
violence.
wars.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And from my perspective, if we're not investing, we can't solve all of those crises. We can't. We can ameliorate them. We can reduce them. We can make them better. But if we're not surging resources to address them, then we can't.
Right.
And if we're just focused on giving handouts to big businesses instead of surging those resources to communities, then I don't know what to tell you.
Right. So I think you make a really good point, and it just reminded me how I've been in conversations with people. Oftentimes, community members are not savvy in terms of knowing we need to get political, right?
Yeah.
Political meaning policy, right? It sounds like a dirty thing, but all we're talking about is policy. Right. All we're talking about is how to encourage our elected officials to make something a priority.
Yep.
I think people see it through a partisan lens.
Yep.
I have a good friend who's an activist who taught me politics equals policy, and that's what you need to teach people. Right.
Yeah.
And I think the more that we share with our neighbors, our family, our friends, that we need you to show up. Right. Town halls, we need you to show up at coffee hours, we need you to write letters, make phone calls, all of that matters. And I think people don't know that as an elected official, you can look back and say, we got 50 calls or 100 calls, all pertaining to this one particular issue.
Yeah, if I could give an example.
Yes.
The threshold to making your voice heard is very, very low, especially in local offices, right? People, I think, and this is a failure of, all the people at every level who, have preceded us in government, which is people who don't think that their voice is going to be heard. But, elected officials, they're going to campaign on a number of issues and they're going to have their minds made up on a number of issues. Mm-hmm. There's a litany of issues beyond that, we aren't even aware of or, hasn't come across our desk, or that, low level, high level, whatever. One email from a constituent can bring that and that's
Wow.
a constituent emailed me and says this is a problem. It's a problem. I'm going to address it. Right? One email. That's all it takes.
Wow.
I had recently a constituent write me about permits and for the state parks that apparently they're tied to the vehicle registration date. And so if you get it not at the Secretary of State at the time you renew your vehicle, you could get it 2 days before your vehicle registration expires, and your park pass that is supposed to be an annual pass is only valid for 2 days. So it should
wow.
be so really the statute has to be changed so that way that the state park pass is valid from the date of purchase for 365 days.
Wow.
And it's just like a very stupid, like simple
Right.
issue that
Right.
but someone shelled out, hundreds of dollars of whatever it is and only had like a month access to what they thought was going to be
Wow.
a year. And I had no idea about this issue.
And how many people would even know that they should reach out to you?
Well, right.
And can get that
exactly.
done?
But and then people talking about pay attention to as much as you can, and part of this is the decline of local media, where used to be where the state rep went anywhere, did a ribbon cutting, it would be on the front page of the local paper.
Good point.
Right? It doesn't exist anymore, and so oftentimes if you're not writing to us, if people aren't talking to us about how they feel about votes, the accountability isn't there. Every election it is, but how many people actually go through and do the work to understand how their representative is voting on things? So I would really encourage people to write your elected officials. I respond to each one. Truly, I do. I read them all. I actually do. Some of them are form letters, so if you read one, you read them all. But truthfully, we're aware of them all, and we respond to them all. And even one can make a big difference in terms of making something a priority, because your constituents are the reason that you are there. And if you are actually, I always said during the campaign, I'm not running to be something, I'm running to do something. And there are many of my colleagues who are like that. And so we really view our constituents as people who are driving our agenda.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you saying that. And I feel like the more we say it, the more it'll start sinking in for people.
So.
We have a huge hurdle to get over with educating people in this way.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad you gave that example, because I don't even think in my mind with the work that I do that I would have thought of that.
Never.
It'll save me some time, because typically my first step is to like rally the crew, right? Like get the troops, and then let's call, let's email, let's show up. So thank you for sharing that too with us.
One call can make a difference.
Oh, I love it. I feel like we need a t-shirt that says
absolutely.
That one call can make a difference. But thank you so much for showing up today, sharing your story, talking about what it's been like for you to get started. I know we'll have to have you back, because there's so many things that you've experienced already.
Oh my God.
Yes, and how we can change. But thank you so much for showing up.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So to our listening audience, I hope you heard the message here today, and that is, not only should it matter when you hear voter rights advocates say that your vote matters, but know that your letter matters. Know that the email that you send matters. Know that when you show up, you might show up and be the only person at a coffee hour, at a town hall, who might speak about your issue, but you're going to be heard by your elected officials. Don't feel intimidated. Don't feel bad about bringing it up. That's actually our responsibility, not only to ourselves and our community, but to our elected officials, because they can't really do the job that they need to do if we don't bring things to their attention. So please show up. Please engage. I will make sure that I post information on where you can go to some of these town halls and get engaged. So stay tuned, and we look forward to talking to you and engaging next time. Thank you for joining us.